Welcome to the Sixcast, a podcast where we discuss real-world strategies, tips, and stories that provide helpful insights for your digital transformation experience.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Sixcast, the hustle and thrive in the six and beyond. Today we have another special guest, Naren Balakrishnan, joining us from Ottawa. Naren is the Principal Tax, R&D and Government Incentives for Grant Thornton LLP. Naren, welcome to the show and it's a pleasure to have you.
Great, thanks so much for having me today.
Grant Thornton doesn't really need an introduction, obviously, one of the largest accounting and advisory firms in the world in terms of accounting. So I don't want to talk too much about Grant Thornton. But Naren, let's talk about yourself. Who you are, how have you been, what are your life goals, what you want to achieve in life, professionally, personally. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, for sure, Waruna, and I can maybe give you a bit of kind of my story a little bit. It's a bit of an interesting background, so for people that don't know about myself or how I got to this point. So essentially, I started off in university. Going back to university, I did computer science. So my passion always was for technology. So and in those days, I'm maybe dating myself a little bit. We're talking about .com and going back to those days. That was kind of the big boom, right? So everybody wanted to get involved with the next big internet company, and I think it was a big it was a big goal of mine as well, like to get into this field. So I started off in that, and I worked in industry for a number of years. I did, programming, software development for a little while, including IBM was actually one of the first companies I worked with. And then I guess the years, a few years in, I found myself thinking, maybe I'm looking for something a little bit different. I still like technology and I still like that aspect of it, but what I was kind of doing wasn't really where I saw myself in the future. So that's when sort of this opportunity presented itself to me, where I got involved in sort of more of the consulting side. So I got an opportunity to get involved with and we're going to be talking about that, and I said in our conversation today, is the R&D tax credit program called SR&ED Shred, and it was a government incentive program. I didn't know anything about it at the time. When I first got started, I had an interest in technology, and that's all I knew. And I slowly once I got into it, I slowly realized this is kind of where I wanted to be. This aspect of work in terms of being able to help other companies, something that's more dynamic, something that's being a part of the innovation landscape in Canada. That was very exciting for me. So again, it was a shift from someone who's hands down doing, software development and coding and things like that, to someone that's, doing something where I'm getting more involved in helping companies, essentially. So I'm not doing the hands-on stuff anymore, but I'm learning from others and seeing what others are doing, and again, staying at the forefront of technology and being part of this landscape. So I guess to answer your question about sort of where I see myself, that's led me to this point where, really that's what excites me. What excites me is what, companies, entrepreneurs, what we're able to do, in Canada, right? How can we help, companies thrive in Canada? How can we grow our economy? I shared an article yesterday just on LinkedIn of how well just in 2021 Canada has done from a venture standpoint, from a funding standpoint, and it's getting to the point where we're not quite at the level of the US, but we're starting to see that growth potential. We're starting to see more impact in Canada. So from a professional standpoint, that's what I hope to continue to do, that trajectory, and maybe there's more avenues that we can explore from a Canadian funding perspective and a growth perspective. But from a personal standpoint, I'm very blessed to have my wife, and I have two sons in my family, and for me, I think from a personal perspective is to kind of see their growth, right? To kind of see what is kind of how can I support them and in their life, and how can they make an impact as well. So I think the thing that ties it all together is that impact for me. I think it's being able to help others, being able to kind of give back to the community. That's a very important aspect of my life as well. When I look at sort of the second half of my life, I think that's an important thing that I want to take part in, and I want my family to take part in as well. And yeah, that's kind of me in a nutshell. I'm sure there's going to be more questions as we go along, but that's me so far and where I'm headed. So
yeah. I can relate to your kind of journey to mine as well. I was in my background is math and physics, obviously, and then I ended up being in strategy, marketing, management, and technology strategy. I don't have a single day in the university or any other colleges getting in some formal education in technology. Everything is like self-taught, but ended up being in like marketing, business, and technology. That's where I am right now as well. So I can relate to. It's not where you start. It's about what really excites you end of the day, right? You end up being in
Exactly.
doing that. You do you go through a discovery phase for 10 years, I would say. For me too.
Yeah.
Like, I was always in marketing, market research, and strategy type of work and branding, and then I will. I wasn't still sure. Do I want to be in marketing technical side of things on marketing? And even at the time, I didn't have any exposure or any formal education on marketing either. So anyway, that's where we are as well. It's all about what excites you. Let's go back to your role at Grant Thornton. What do you do there? What's your role there?
Yeah, so I'm part of a group that's called RDGI, which is Research and Development and Government Incentives. So as the name suggests, kind of two parts to it. There's research and development and government incentives. Essentially what we do is we help our clients access government funding. So essentially it comes in all different stages, and obviously our clients are across many different industries, but I guess the thing that everyone has access to is these type of programs. The big program that we help with is called Scientific Research and Experimental Development. So you may have heard of it as commonly known as SHRED. Essentially, it's Canada's largest R&D tax incentive tax credit program to help companies essentially perform R&D in Canada, and it's a way to subsidize the cost that they're spending in Canada. So the idea is you have an interesting idea, and you obviously you're going to be spending some money to either hire people or to develop a new product or a new process. How can we help you get some of that money back essentially each year when you go to file your tax return? So that's a very big. It's the program is about $4 billion a year in terms of the amounts that are given out to companies, and it's really designed for the SMEs, right? So we're looking at, while Grant Thornton in general, we play more so in the small, medium-sized space. We're a large group, as you hinted at the top of the conversation, which is nice. So we have the services of the big four, but we tend to play more in the small, medium-sized market. So that's why our group is really able to help startups. We're able to help entrepreneurs. We're able to help companies that are not starting out from a funding perspective. So the tax credit is a big one. And on the other side, we have government grants. So the other thing our team would be doing is, can we align programs for companies in different areas? And the focuses are things like hiring, training, again, innovation, market expansion. So as you can imagine, there are a lot of different programs that are available. It's trying to find the ones that are a good fit for companies, depending on, again, their industry, their geography, and even their stage. So we, to be completely transparent, like sometimes some programs, companies it might be too early, right, to access a specific program. But what we do, and we probably get into this as well later in the conversation, is it's not easy, right, to access these programs or to tap into these programs or to fill out these type of applications or to get approved on these applications. It's not an easy task at all, and that's where a group like ours is very helpful to help. I always tell my clients, like, the money is there. We're here to help you access it, right? And that's our goal, and that's our role.
So, Naren, what is your eligibility criteria then for a lot of these things? And what do you find is like something compelling enough for their application to be supported, approved, and then potentially moved along to get some funding? And how long does that process take?
Yeah, that's
a very lengthy process, and is there a lot of consultation?
Yeah, it kind of depends. I can talk to both sides of it. So if we look at the tax credit side, obviously we're looking for companies that are not just in ideation. So we want to make sure that they're incorporated. So anyone listening today, strongly encourage you, if you have an idea, always a good idea to incorporate your company, because without doing that, you're not able to really access any of these programs and things like that. So if it's too early stage, it's difficult. So that's the first thing. You get your company incorporated. So you're into the stage where you haven't, beyond just an idea, but you're doing something, your first stage of development. So you're either looking at MVP, you're actually doing some work on the ground. So that could be a combination of, you've hired some people. You could be hiring even students from, university. It could be very early, and that's still okay. As long as you're incurring some cost in Canada, that's a program. The SHRED program is one that you can definitely access. In terms of timing, I always like to say from the point of you've completed your application, you want to give yourself a few months, especially the first go around, because usually what will happen is with your first application, there's going to be some sort of a review from the CRA that's going to tack on a little bit of time. They like to talk to almost every first time claimant under the program. So I would say, under order of 3 to 4 months from the time of filing, you can probably expect to get back something from the SHRED program. Government grants really vary. So as you can imagine, again, some of the hiring programs, for example, subsidies for new students or interns, they can come within a couple of weeks. Some of the larger programs like Sustainable Development or IRAP, the process can take maybe on the order of months as well. So it really varies, but I would say the big things to think about are, make sure you're incorporated, make sure you're tracking kind of what you're doing, track your expenditures, track your spend. The planning is essential, I would say, for these type of programs, because, you want to have a good plan in place, and we talk about things like business plan, but also your expenses, right? So, what are you tracking towards? What are your goals? What would you like to be doing in a few months? So you're always kind of looking ahead to see where you might need the funding. That's also, I say, very, very critical. So that's kind of the landscape in a nutshell. So.
And do you have some modeling or planning that you provide these applicants in so that they're able to prepare like this trajectory that you're looking for in a timeline or horizon? Do you have that? Do you have that in your consultation?
Absolutely, yeah.
So that they're able to.
Absolutely. So our process is. Yeah, sorry. Our process is not just, hey, we're going to meet you at the end to help you fill out the application. Part of our goal is to be there with you as you're progressing, right? So, you've got a certain amount of, you've got a timeline, and we kind of work with you to say, okay, what are you going to be looking at in the next few months, in the next couple of years, work out that trajectory, and then figure out a kind of a funding plan. So some of it is, hey, we're looking to add some resources, or we're looking to expand into different markets. Can we sort of align different funding with you? And the other thing is that we do as in our group is we're constantly monitoring the landscape. So as you can imagine, the budget rolls around every year, every spring. There's always changes to programs. And then throughout the year, programs pop up. Like a couple of years ago, there was a women's entrepreneurship fund, as an example, right? The intake came and went in a few weeks, and so that's something that we want to keep our eyes on to make our clients aware of, right? So yes. So it's not just a we'll see you once a year type deal with us. We're sort of we're kind of a partner when it comes to funding. So we want to be there. Pick up the phone, message anytime you want if you have something in mind, or we can even reach out to you when we think there might be an applicable program. So.
Tackling to the same, along the same lines of questions, many business owners or even aspiring entrepreneurs. When they start a business, they think there's no support. You're all by yourself. You're alone in this game, right? So is it true? Is it not true? Do you want to have some sort of an MVP or a proof of concept before really going live, or are they asking for any funding, or even banks wouldn't even look at you? That's how it is, right? And when I started, I started a couple of businesses myself, and I completely self-funded all of them. And some of the businesses, actually, because I had good relationships, they extended a credit card. But nowadays, you don't even see that happening. Banks, obviously, if you're doing well, we'll help you. If you're not doing well, no. Or rather, if you're starting off, very unlikely you will help. So do you think these funding options can support any new ideas, or are you by yourself initially when you're starting a business?
Yeah, it's a great question, Waruna, and I think there's some truth to that, in the sense that, like, when I think about years back, 15, 20 years ago, companies, there was you had an idea on a napkin or something like that, and companies were getting funded. In Canada, it was that boom of there was ideas. Since then, I think it's sort of settled. It's sort of calmed down a little bit. You're absolutely right. It can't just be an idea anymore. From what I've seen, my experiences, you need to have an MVP. You have to have something that, you're showing an investor or someone that they're comfortable with funding you. And I think the Canadian landscape is changing. I mean, I think in the US, you look at the Valley, there's still obviously more money there. So when you look at dilutive funding, VC Angel, there's still going to be more sources outside of Canada. We have gotten better. If you look at, I think this was the largest year, if I'm not mistaken, on record for a lot of that type of angel funding and VC funding for Canadian companies, which is great to see, especially in a global pandemic. So to the other side of it, though, from a government funding perspective, I think it's a bit of I want to say there's a bit of hesitancy or uncertainty or maybe lack of information more so than anything else. I think there's a hesitancy sometimes from companies to say, we don't think there's anything here, or the process is cumbersome, or it's too complicated, or we don't know how to do it. I think it's more that is kind of the blocker that I've seen, because I talk to a lot of companies every day. A lot of them say, hey, like, yeah, we'd love to do shred as an example, but we think it's too much work. We think it's we're not aware of the process or the complexities that surround it. And so then again, that's where there's probably a bit of an education on our side, and to help companies, right, to say again, yes, these are programs that you can access. We know many companies that are accessing these programs, and you should be accessing them as well. And it's to kind of bridge that gap, right? So that's what our goal is because we want to make sure that companies that are doing interesting things and are deserving of funding get there, right? That's the goal. Now, not to say, absolutely, if you're too early, if you again are in a phase where you're not really, it's probably not a good phase to be funded, or maybe your ideas are not a stage to be funded, or you're doing something that maybe, for example, in the R&D program, you might be doing something that doesn't qualify, right? And so again, we can tell you that, right? In a conversation, we can figure that out for you. So we're not here to say, hey, like, yes, there's money, go get it for everybody, as long as you meet the criteria. But I think there is definitely that sort of feeling that I hear from entrepreneurs and startups, sometimes companies, is that it is a complicated process, and they're not wrong. But again, that's where we can help. Time, I always say, time is money. So sometimes it's a case of, yes, if you had unlimited time, you could do a lot of these things, but obviously you don't, and that's where it doesn't hurt to ask for external help, just like you would in any other field. If you're looking at legal, if you're looking at, again, accounting, if you're looking at any other type of service, it's always good to have someone who's maybe an expert in the field to help you. But yeah, so sort of to answer your question, Waruna, I think there is a bit of a requirement, I guess, to be at a certain stage, but it's not that you need to be, maybe it used to be here and maybe it doesn't need to be all the way over here. It's probably somewhere in the middle. It's a little bit, and it's fine, and we're trying to help you bridge that gap, I would say. So
that's an interesting point, actually, Naren, because you should look at the funding source, funding partner, to be in the category of legal or accounting support to a business. We're trying to do everything ourselves. You can't do it, right? And same here. I was like, okay, this is too much work. How can I articulate my idea into an attractive deck that makes sense, which I don't have the time for because I have a business to run, and we struggle to blossom in our business idea because we don't have the time to articulate them into a nice looking deck that matches the requirements of the funding sources. I totally agree. I think you should be, that's where an organization like yours come into play, where can get some support, advisory, partner with them, pay a small fee to start off. I think we'll talk about that in detail as well. Let's say, change our tracks a little bit. Let's say that we have a pitch deck. Let's assume that we have our idea articulated into a pitch. Now, can a pitch deck get funding anymore? The general consensus is you cannot anymore because things have changed. Do you need to, again, going back to that MVP, do you expect the founders to put their own money for the MVP? It could be, $50,000 to $100,000, whatever the number, depending on the tech. If it's a tech project, it could be somewhere between 50 to 100, 150. If it is a small kind of a shop, kind of a regular traditional business, could be different. Do you want to see a POC and then talk to you?
I think so. So,
Naren, can I interject? Sure. Does it matter what the appearance of a pitch deck? Does it really matter of the appearance of the pitch deck? I don't think a pitch deck is the prerequisite for funding, right? You're looking for a lot more of the information, the intelligence, the background, the financials. Is that correct? Like, that's kind of like, if you prioritize what you're looking for, could you give us an example of what the prioritization would look like? Because I'm sure, going off of what Waruna said, like a pitch deck of professionalism is very much obviously gives an impression that you are absolutely invested, that you believe in what you're doing, that you have a strong, a strong sense of like attachment to your idea or to your business scope. But in reality, that's not what you're really assessing them on, right? So can we tell the people who are watching this audience, like in prioritization, where should they focus their attention of the actual like information that you want? What is it that will really stand out, that will grasp the attention of someone like yourself to say, hey, this is good enough for us to move this along?
Yeah, it's to answer, I guess, both of your questions is it is more than just the presentation of the pitch deck, I would say. So it's not just the case of like having a pitch deck that's, it's promising maybe a lot of different things. I think it's what's behind it, right? It's really, do you have the backing of the solid financials? And I'm coming from an accounting firm. I don't have an accountant, but that does go a long way. Your projections, how are your time to market, your revenue projections, how are you your costs, those numbers and those things. Again, those are things that we also do from our group, from our perspective. We have a team that does valuations, and that's one thing that they're going to tell you, right? You want to have those numbers in order. It has to be realistic. It has to be something. If I don't know if you guys watch, as things have a Dragon's Den, when they talk about, how did you come up? The one question they always ask is, how did you come up with this valuation, right? Sometimes the numbers don't make any sense, and the people that do well on that show, if you notice, are the ones that are prepared with those numbers, right? A lot of times they come prepared to say, and it's very similar in this world. When you talk about pitch decks, when you talk about funding, that's the key thing, and it also does help. I'm always a proponent of getting the right people behind you, or even early on. It's like sometimes it might cost you a little bit more. It might, but it's good to have that. We find that when you're vetted with either a strong pedigree of from a founder perspective, sometimes you align yourself with some good advisors, but aligning yourselves with good partners in the industry as well. Like I think that does go a long way. That credibility we find does help. So I think the trajectory I see with companies that do well again, or how they get funded in the beginning, I think we're to a point that you had about, yes, it's more than just ideation. I think I mentioned this before. Proof of concept, MVP, it does help now, right? Having something tangible that you can show, that does help you. And then the other aspect of it is, a lot of companies are hesitant to go after dilutive funding, and rightfully so. You don't want to give up ownership in your company early on. I would always suggest, friends and family investing a little bit of money. The nice thing is if you have some investment from that's non-government and you put it in and you spend money on R&D, we can help you get some of that back through the R&D tax credit program, right? So that's a natural kind of progression. There are also nice programs. I don't know if you guys are familiar with things like MyTax, which is kind of a university matching program. So the idea is a company can put, $10,000 in. MyTax will put $10,000 in, and you get access to university resources, students and stuff like that to work on your project. So there's a lot of different things that you can explore that I've seen companies who do well. They start there. They don't suddenly just say, "Hey, we're going to go to an angel to get funding." We can start with this. We don't need to start there. We can start small, but they build their idea. So they're going beyond the pitch deck to come up with something that's that a product that they think is going to work, MVP, proof of concept, whatever you want to call it, and then have the backing of a solid team. I find that those things going together hand in hand kind of help companies. So, yeah.
And when you say a solid team, what does that look like to you? And from your experience, what have you seen as like what have you defined as like something that could qualify as a
so I think it's a combination of
Is that sorry? Maybe I'm being vague, but is that the number of people, the positions that they're holding? Does that mean the input that they've done, or like the length of time they've been invested in, the quality of their work? I think
it's quantity over. I think it's quality over quantity in the sense that you want people that if you're in let's say you're doing a medical device company, do you have somebody in a hospital setting, right? Somebody as an advisor that you can bring in, somebody in specific to what you're trying to do that can help because they've been there, they've seen it. Maybe you have an advisor that's has been in the entrepreneur's shoes before. They've run companies. When you have that sort of backing, I would say that's kind of what I'm referring to. So when you look at advisor, when you look at partners, and similarly for your field. So if you're looking at, it's always good to have somebody strong on the legal side. I would say there's a lot of stuff that comes up, from incorporation to patent to there's a lot of different considerations of legal. And nowadays there are very good legal law firms. It's good to have that. I would say even from the beginning. Accounting partners. I'm not just saying that because I'm in an accounting firm, but I find that there's a lot lot of different considerations. Early on you might have things around taxation, or you might be rapidly expanding and you have considerations going into other markets. There's tax planning. I don't know if you guys are familiar with like estate planning, and there's all sorts of tax shelters with your family. There's all sorts of considerations. It's always better to plan for something, plan ahead, than plan out of it when you're in trouble, right? So things like that. So legal, tax, any of those functions, I find that it's good to have that sort of support from the beginning. And nowadays, what I find is really great is companies. It would be great. When I was in university, we didn't sort of have the support through the incubators and the accelerators. Now every university in Canada has some sort of a program, and even through these programs, a lot of them do offer a lot of these things. There's supports that are offered. So you have entrepreneurs in residence, you have advisors. I would strongly encourage companies to take advantage of these types of when you're now starting out. Take a look at what you have. A lot of great companies have come out of university. You can imagine engineering projects, fourth year projects have come out of entrepreneurship programs. So you're seeing a lot of that these days. So I think there is support in abundance. You don't need to be alone. Trying to do this all on your own. There is help available. So.
Can you, just before, I don't want to take away from Waruna, do you have another question? Because I'm interested in knowing. Okay, so you were talking, initially you said you've moved around and you were originally doing computer science, and then you kind of got into this, and it was, it just happened by happenstance. But I'm just curious, so in terms of meaningful impact, do you have a particular story or a client that did come in at an infancy stage at this ideation phase that had a great plan, that you were able to get them through all these stages? Can you tell us what that success journey looked like? And just to give other people some idea of what can come out of that, and how much funding can they possibly get, and where can they go in the long term?
Yeah, absolutely.
And with these government support initiatives.
Absolutely.
Funding.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, no, there's a number of stories, actually. I kind of see that quite often. So these are not, once in a lifetime type things. We see this quite often. So, without naming names, there was a good client of mine. They're in the automotive industry. So AI, they're using AI to do vehicle sort of detection, malfunction detection. So say you're driving along and they have they have the ability to tap into your car and say, hey, you have a diagnostic, you have an oil change, and they were doing this well before. I know a lot of the newer vehicles are starting to do this now, but so they were 5-6 years ago. So the founder, his father was a mechanic, actually. So it's a really cool story. So he lived that world of sort of the manual world of mechanics, and try to incorporate software AI technology into that world. And so when they were starting off, this was a company with maybe 2 or 3 people. They didn't have a lot of funding, and a lot of what I mentioned before is kind of how they got started. They took advantage of some student hiring grants to kind of build up. They built up their their proof of concept. Eventually, they got accepted into an accelerator in the States, in Detroit. So it's part of an automotive accelerator. So again, where I was talking about a good fit for that type of company. So they got themselves aligned with a very good group that's doing exactly what they're doing. So at the time, so automotive technology, and then I've seen them rapidly grow. So to the point where they're actually working with big name dealerships in the States again, and even in Canada, to offer their solutions. And they've built up their solutions, so they're able to do a lot more than what they did when they first started. They've taken advantage of the Shred program every year with our company's help, including a lot of different funding grant programs such as IRAP. And so I think they're probably close to 20 plus people now. And it's a Kitchener-Waterloo company. And again, job creation, Canadian, innovation, great story in terms of their solution, something that obviously is very beneficial as a product to anyone who drives, a car. And when you think about AI as a big push for Canada, Canada has recently announced a number of superclusters, and AI was one of their big pushes. That was just one example that's sort of off the top of my head, but definitely there's a number of great stories of companies that have I've seen them go through the trajectory of a startup, early stage company, no real funding, to the point where they're now generating revenue, have taken advantage of government funding programs, and also have raised money as well. So. Thanks.
Now, Naren, I always hear about tech development or AI, and more for a lot of the funding are going towards that, or medical, biomedical industry, or health care type of industries. Have you seen funding being available for traditional businesses if you want to start just a regular, let's say, a retail shop out, in a small town in Ontario? What are the opportunities? Do you really need to have some sort of differentiation factor? Would this organization be looking at the durable competitive advantages of these organizations if you wanted to start just a courier business or delivery business? It looks like most of the funding are onto the tech and more of an innovative side, but will there be any funding for non-innovative traditional businesses as well?
That's a great question, Waruna. Yeah, I guess tech is always the maybe the sexy kind of the name that's out there, but definitely there is, and I think the example I would give is in the last couple of years with the pandemic, especially, there's been a lot of push to supports for small business. So we have definitely seen, and I think those will continue to some extent. So obviously those came out of necessity to help companies that were suffering, especially small business really probably were the biggest hit group when we talk about COVID and everything like that. But there are definitely programs for traditional groups like that. So it could be around getting back to business. It could be around there was a recent program they announced for similar, but for companies that were from a tourism perspective that were losing out because of what happened. There was a boost again to bring some of those companies back. So that's kind of an example of some of the things that the government is trying to do. But there have always been hiring type programs. There's programs. So if you talk about traditional retail, market expansion programs have been there as well. So there could be things like that. And then beyond tech and beyond what you just said about retail, there's also a lot of it push for clean technology. And we have clients that are doing manufacturing, right? Clean is a big one. When you go at green technology, clean energy, that's a big push of the government. So that's not just tech companies. So you talk about companies that are doing, more innovative type manufacturing approaches, maybe things that they're doing things in a bit more different, cleaner processes. They're doing new type of machinery and equipment and refinement. So that's whole another sector that does get some funding. We may hear again more about tech and with AI is a big buzzword, obviously, but there is definitely support for other groups. And again, I've seen it more so in the last little while with a lot of the pandemic help. So
I think fantastic conversation so far, Naren. A lot of valuable insight and information actually for those who are looking to start a business. Let's say that going back, just to take a couple of steps back to talk, you talked about having everything that you do planned out and recorded, having correct partners. Let's take an example of a couple of founders who have an idea. The idea is through research they are proven to be a viable product or technology. And they have spent, let's say, $10,000, $20,000 already. What should the next step be for them? Just step by step, pretty much is what I'm looking for. Again, I'm not. It doesn't have to be perfect, obviously, Naren. I know. We are looking for a startup funding guide right now, but then again, for those who are listening and watching this, would be helpful. Okay, if you have an idea, you have it on paper, you have done research. It looks like that it's going to be a viable project, but you don't have an POC, proof of concept, or MVP. What's next?
I guess you could reach out to us. I guess would be the easy answer. But to kind of summarize it, I think you want to continue to develop it. Like what I was saying earlier about maybe reach out to an accelerator incubator, and maybe one of the founders is part of again, I don't know the age or if they're coming out of school. That would be a great place to start. Can you find if not find a research group or a university group, because there are these available, and some universities specialize in certain areas. area. So depending on the sector or industry they're in, it could be, is it U of T, Waterloo, there's, McMaster, there's different places. Try to align yourself with something like that, because there will be, we'll be surrounded with other groups that are in a similar position as yours. So you're not alone. So that might be one of the first things I would look at. Obviously, I mentioned again, talk about incorporating the company. You've spent some money, potentially if you spent some money, the SHRED program can be accessed early on. So that's the thing that people don't really realize is once you've started to spend money on either, some sort of form of R&D in Canada, that's a real good place to start, because that can help you recoup some of that money. Then what you do with that money is you reinvest, right? So maybe you bring on a resource. You don't necessarily bring on, there's a couple of ways to save costs. You don't necessarily need to bring on a full-time salary person. You can be bringing on someone part-time. You can be bringing on someone as a contractor. Now, outsource, we get that question sometimes, if you do offshore work, that unfortunately does not qualify in Canada. So you do have to find resources in Canada. Again, if you want to take advantage of those programs, if there's a cost benefit to doing something offshore, absolutely. Like I always tell my clients, like, you're not in the business of tax credits, right? You're trying to do something that makes sense for your business. So sometimes that is, if you have to find some cost saving somewhere, that makes sense. And then look at the government grants. It's, yes, in the early stages, sometimes it is a bit harder to access some of those funds, but I would say some of the easier ones are on the hiring side. So if you can get, a subsidy for a student, you get that person in, you get them to help you with your proof of concept. So I'm using sort of a kind of a case study example here. Again, that gives you traction. The proof of concept, you get to product development, then you maybe start revenue. Then you want to start talking about, depending on what you're doing. Let's say you're doing something in the medical. You want to look at viability. So you're probably talking to hospitals. So there's a lot of different things that are happening. But I think even in the early stages, there's things that you can be doing. So, yeah.
Naren, thank you very much. I think this is a great conversation. It'll be very, very helpful to a lot of startup founders and those who have, aspiring entrepreneurs who have been thinking what to do, feel lonely when they have to start a business, just like the way I felt. Kithmini, do you have any other closing notes?
Can you recommend some resources, books, anything that could get us into the right direction so that we can eventually reach out to someone like yourself to go into this next stage of kind of seeing that through? What would be your top one recommendation as a book?
Maybe I'll cheat and say two. So a book that, an older book that I've sort of reread again is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. I'm probably familiar with it. So it's not a new book, but it's a one that I kind of a go-to for me in terms of just kind of a motivational type of book, and it kind of gives you those kind of tips and tricks, things that you can be practicing. So I think that's a good one. A recent one, maybe from was Think Like a Monk by Jay Shetty's book. I don't know if you guys are familiar with him. So he again talks about his life story and a lot of different things that have worked for him, and I thought that was a pretty good read. So I think I find, and those are not the only two examples. Those are the ones that I've recently been kind of read, but I think things like positive motivational books, it is absolutely, you're right. Like it's been a challenging time. No matter, everyone has been impacted. No one's been immune from this, and some more than others. But I think kind of that positive mindset, through those books. I'm a big podcast. We're doing a podcast today. I'm a big podcast guy as well. And I think there's if you you're doing different activities and you want to be out and have listen to podcasts and things like that, motivation. There's a lot of good motivational ones as well. So that would be my recommendation, and kind of keep going, right? Like if you have an idea, like hopefully for entrepreneurs out there, keep going. This is not we've had a rough time, but I think we're slowly come out of it. And there's companies have done well even in the pandemic. From my perspective, that was great to see. Obviously, again, some suffered more than others, but I think that would be my messaging. And hopefully, things kind of turn around for the better as we get into next year. So, yeah.
Naren, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time and advice and your insights on how to get some funding for your business. So I hope that we can. Is there any way that any of the listeners of this podcast can reach out to you? Can we leave your information on our social media posts or YouTube as well? How can they reach out to you?
Yeah, probably best way. If you want to share my contact information, so LinkedIn is really good. My email, and then I've got my website at the Grant Thornton page as well that we can share with listeners. But absolutely, I'm always happy to have a conversation with an entrepreneur. So for sure.
Thank you, Naren. Thank you very much. It's a great conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me. Yeah.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Sixcast. We'd love to connect with you, so feel free to comment or reshare. You can also find us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn at Six Senses. Bye for now.